Yeah, Job, everybody knows about Job. Even people who never read the Bible know about Job. Job is famous worldwide. It's become part of English literature. It's become part of historical lore that is known by peoples that do not have Judeo-Christian faith as in their background. And yet, it's a perplexing book as well. And I'm spending a little more time on Job than I would, in a survey course, mostly because I enjoy it. I think it's got a tremendous message for us, and because you may never really hear it expounded, and this may be your only shot at any kind of overview at it. And it's not easy to overview the book. But, and there's more in the notes proportionally, but again, I'm not going to cover everything in the notes, but you will have that in the future. It is a kind of a theodicy in that it deals with the issue of human suffering and divine justice, but it never really answers the questions that we'd like to know on that. And so, in that sense, it's not necessarily a theodicy. We looked a little bit at the issues of authorship, of the date of writing, of the time of the story, and we noted the basic outline of the book in terms of how it proceeds. There's a prose prologue in which Job's piety and prosperity is set forth. The attack on Job's possessions and on his person are allowed by God, using Satan as the instrument. And then the arrival of Job's friends. We noted that the poetic body of Job, chapters 3 through 42, 6, really are, as you read it, you get frustrated, don't you? And that's by design, because that's where Job is. And that frustration is necessary for him to come to a place of understanding, a place of deeper faith. And that was God's purpose in the whole thing. And he needs to come to a point of silence in order to hear God. One way to look at Job is that the book is this long because Job spent so much time talking he couldn't listen. Do we ever have that trouble? Yeah, we do. And we may have been told that a number of times. Be quiet and listen. And that's what God was getting at with Job all the way through the first part of the book. With Job, we saw the initial monologue in chapter 3. He basically says life is not worth enduring because of his present circumstances. He cursed the day of his birth. He lamented that he did not die at birth. He complained that God prolongs his life. Did we do that on Monday? Okay, jot those down quickly. Job in the book is not going to sin with his mouth. He is going to complain to God. He is going to tell God very forthrightly how he feels. He is going to tell God what he feels wrong about his situation, is wrong about his situation. His wife initially says, curse God and die. Why do you maintain your integrity? Because at the beginning he says, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. And the narration says that in this, Job did not sin. And at the end of the book, God is going to say, Job, offer sacrifices for your friends. And he's going to say to them, you've not spoken right of me, what my servant Job has. And yet Job is not just, oh, this is wonderful, I'm suffering for God. No. That's not Job's attitude. He's in pain and he's in confusion. And his faith was being tested. And we see this in his initial lament. He just basically says, as far as the experience of life, it would be better not to have lived than to go through this. And that's his emotion. And so he does not contemplate suicide, but he does express the feeling that it would have been better for him, and he would have preferred not to have lived than to live, even with all the good that he had had, and then be going through what he is now. And then Job's three friends come. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite. they come and they prepare to speak to Job. Now, they are exemplary at the beginning. They sit with him for a week in silence. They just basically are there. They mourn with him. Then after Job opens his mouth and goes into this big lament, it kind of sets them off, and they're going to help Job fix his problem. And that's their problem, is that they're taking the stance that they are going to fix Job's problem. And there's only one person who can fix Job's problem, and that's God. And so they take the role of counselors, but not in a positive, helpful sense. And their speeches, the cycles of speeches that they go through with Job, and they really, you notice in here, they really aren't debating and answering each other point by point. They just go off on these tangents, and they pile all this verbiage up, and it's more like what they've discovered in some ancient cultures, contest speeches, rather than dialogue or debate. It's just, who can make their point by, putting together various things and looking at various authorities and so forth. But the basic charge is the same. If you just look down through I have it for you in your notes, the Eliphaz speech, the Bildad speech, the Zophar speech, they all have the same charge. Job has sinned. The basis of the appeal differs somewhat. Eliphaz bases his appeal on experience and illumination. He says, I had the Spirit came to me in a vision, and He told me what to tell you. Ooh, what do you do with that? And then he says, I've seen. And so he has a basis for his appeal. Specific accusations, the oppression and neglect of the poor and needy, even though he begins saying, I know you've been a good guy. By the end of his cycle of speeches, he's saying, you've really been a rotter. And nobody really sees it, but that's really what you are now. You need to do something. And the summary exhortation is, repent and be restored to your place of blessing. And he views God as the Almighty who controls the destinies of men, and He's independent of mankind. Now, you've got that all in your notes, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But what we would call his approach, all three of their approaches, is retribution theology. Retribution theology. And what they are working at here is that when somebody suffers, it is because they deserve it. And when somebody is blessed by God, it is because they deserve it. That there is a direct relationship, and it can always be determined and seen, and it always works out in experience. It's always, always, always. That's the key word. It's guaranteed. That there is an inviolable relationship between what a person does and what a person experiences in life as a result of God's rewarding or punishing for actions. And that's retribution theology. You might hear today, karma. Oh, I got bad karma. What's that mean? Well, there's something going on bad in my life, and it's bringing all these bad things. Everything that's happened to me is connected to something that's going on in me. And so retribution theology basically takes the tact that good people experience good things and bad people experience bad things. And all three friends come at that from different directions, but they all come to the same conclusion. Job, you have sinned. I don't know what it is. Just repent and tell God you've sinned and you deserve this, and He'll fix it. And so that's what they continually hammer at him about. Now, you ever run into that? You ever been tempted to tell somebody that? Or have you ever told somebody that? Boy, there's something really going on in your life. You get up and you don't have any clean socks, and then, the shower water's cold, and you come to Old Testament and the room's too hot or too cold, and you go to lunch and there's nothing there you like to eat, and then somebody steps on your favorite whatever and smashes it, and then you go out and somebody's put a dent in your car, and okay, that just happens by noon. And you say, God, what have I done to deserve this? Anybody ever done that? thought that? It's a natural response. What's going on here? What did I do? And the worse things get, the more powerful that thought comes. And then when you have somebody come along and you say, God's trying to get your attention here. He's trying to tell you, you're heading the wrong way because God always blesses the righteous. And that's basically what's going on here in these cycle of speeches. Eliphaz, or Bildad, basically the same charge. Job has sinned. He bases his appeal on wisdom and tradition. He says, repent and be restored. The Almighty is dispensing retribution, and He's sovereign over the universe. And again, retribution theology. Zophar, the same thing. Job has sinned. He just is dogmatic assumption. I just know it. Repent, be restored. The Almighty is mysterious and unknowable in His retributive justice. But that's it. Retribution theology. No matter where it comes from and how it gets there, it's the same thing. That's what's going on. And so this cycle over and over is Job saying, I haven't. I'm not aware of anything. God, this is not because of what I've done. And they're saying, oh, yes, it is. And so this is the main problem. This is the main issue. This is what his friends are hammering at, and it is not helpful because it is not true. Now, the three friends' failure. They had admirable motives, to be sure. You can write this at the bottom of page 38. They came to comfort Job, and they came to help him continue, to help him get through this. And so they are not to be faulted in their basic motivation. They did make some accurate assertions. They emphasized God's sovereignty. Well, that's true. And when you read through Job, a lot of things they say, did you find yourself agreeing with? Yeah. Why? Because they're true in isolation, in given circumstances, as far as we can tell. It's like Proverbs. All right? God is just. And they make that point over and over and over again. He does not pervert justice, and He doesn't. And God is righteous. He's the righteous judge. There's no issue, no question about how He is or the basis upon which He governs the universe. And so much of what they say is true. The problem is they apply it in a wrong way. Their failure lies in the fact that they have an incomplete view of God. Can God ever not judge the guilty, to let it go for a time? Can God ever allow the wicked to prosper? Can God ever allow the righteous to suffer? They could not conceive of the conditions under which that could happen. And so they conclude wrongly, on the basis of truth that they had, that Job had sinned, and that is why God had brought this into his life. They apply the wrong aspect of God's character to Job's situation. It is not God's righteousness and justice that is applicable to this situation. Now, we know that from the first two chapters, don't we? Because we, as readers, are clued in right at the beginning why it is that Job is suffering. He is suffering because God and Satan have made some sort of some people have called it a wager, a bet, a contest. Now, we don't really know what to call it, but that's what it is. And basically God is saying, go ahead, I will allow you to afflict Job to see if the only reason he worships me is because I give him stuff and I keep him healthy. So Job doesn't know that. The friends don't know that. We do. And so their failure lies in that they don't have a big enough view of God. They don't have a complete view of God's character. And Job had the same need, but not to the same degree or in the same way. And so retribution theology comes from applying things that are true about God to our situation without realizing that God is free. And that really is the heart of the message of the book. He is free to deal with His creation as He will in His sovereignty. And our response still must be one of worship and submission. Now let's see a little bit of how that is. Now you've got on page 39 just a summary of how Job responds to his friends. I'm not going to go through this. I'm not even going to read all the way through it. But this is one way to go back and just to kind of put the book together sometime when you have some time to meditate on this. Job's case against God. Job says some pretty strong things about God. He says that it's unfair for God to make Job his target, that he has an unfair advantage because Job has no mediator, no umpire, is a special word used in this book that has to do with mediation, like a mediator who'll be called in to reconcile a difference between, let's say, a trade union and a corporation, and they can't come together on a contract, and a mediator comes in, a federal mediator. Job is saying, and this, was part of the ancient world with lawsuits and people involved in contracts and some kind of agreements, and there's some kind of an issue. This would be the first stage. Then a mediator would be brought in before it would actually go to a magistrate, to a judge. And Job just wishes that there is somebody who could come and be this for him and allow him to know what God's charge is against him. He sort of has the same idea, that there must be something he's done, that God does have something against him. He knows it doesn't have anything to do with what his friends have said because he knows his own life, he knows his own heart. But he would like God to tell him what it is that's going on. And so Job feels the unfairness in that. He says it's nonsensical for God to destroy His own creature. It's unfair for God to conceal the reason for His affliction in chapter 13. He's worn Job out. He's turned Job over to the ungodly. He's ruined Job's good reputation. He's left Job without hope. Job has been separated from family and friends. Well, when you're really into suffering, people they stay away from you. Mostly they just don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. They're just uncomfortable. Sometimes they stay away because they think, well, if the lightning bolt struck once, it's going to strike twice, and I don't want to be standing too close. I'll move over here. But for whatever reason, suffering does often result in that. And in chapter 23, similar to the charge of no mediator in chapter 9, God's hiding, so He can't hear his case. And He will not fairly deal with Job as in a court of law. And so this is how he feels. Job's summary speech to his friends, he continues to maintain his integrity. This is all in chapter 27. He imprecates, that is, he says, may my enemies be cursed. He doesn't call them his enemies, but the implication may be there that that's how he feels. And Job instructs his friends about the way of the wicked. And then in chapter 28, there's this great poem by Job on the fact that men can go into the earth and they can mine jewels and precious stones, but wisdom no person can find. It's God's, and God is the one who brings it forth, and God is the one who gives it to man. And so we see that Job understands God, he submits to God, he understands God's ways, he understands the distance between him and God, but he is still in this problem. He protests his innocence in chapter 29. In chapter 30, he sets forth his humiliation as proof of an unknown charge. And then Job demands his accuser to specify his charges in chapter 31, taking kind of an oath of innocence in the whole process. And so we find this very involved, very very involved turmoil in getting Job to the place where God will speak to him, but he's not there yet. We're 31 chapters into the book, and not any closer to Job having satisfaction with regard to what in the world is happening to him than we were in chapter 3. You say, why waste so much time getting to that point? Well, because God takes time to work with us. We need time. And some of us take longer to get quiet and open our ears than others. But God will do whatever it takes to bring us to a true understanding of our relationship and a full understanding of our relationship. Elihu then comes in. He's the fourth friend. Haven't seen him before. He's just a surprise. He drops in unannounced and starts off on a whole other cycle, and you think, oh, here we go again. Did you think that when you got the Elihu speeches? Oh, my goodness. Here we go again. And if you didn't know how long this book was, see where it ends, you think, oh, am I ever going to get this finished for Old Testament in the morning? Here we are. Here we go again. Elihu defends his right to speak. He corrects Job's wrong view of God's justice. He does correct Job. He corrects Job's wrong view of his own righteousness. And he, I think, basically says, you're close to messing up here with your mouth. But what he mostly does is he affirms God's righteousness in the context of his sovereign freedom. He affirms God's righteousness in the context of his sovereign freedom. And that is going to be the great contribution of Elihu. Elihu is going to be a friend. I believe Elihu is the hero of the book from the standpoint of the resolution of Job's problem. And I'll summarize that. I've got a lot of stuff on Elihu here, but I'm going to just set forth a little bit of it. And I'll probably come back on Friday and just conclude a little bit about Elihu and what we can learn from him with regard to how we approach suffering and how we help people approach suffering. Clouds bring the most varied things into our lives, don't they? They can delight and they can destroy. And the same cloud can do both. Right? The same cloud can come and bring the rain that one person really needs for a crop, but next door, the rain is in such a way that it just, washes something out and destroys something. And the exact same storm can be a blessing to one person and bring absolute devastation to another. Some of you have experienced that. And Elihu's whole message to Job is wrapped up in the illustration of clouds. Clouds become the key to interpreting the message of Job. And so, very important. Elihu and his, look to the clouds. And in chapter 35, that's exactly what he says. Look to the clouds. There are difficulties with Elihu. His absence from the rest of the book, people say he adds nothing substantial. It's just more stuff about how God is righteous and just. That he interrupts the continuity of the dialogues. That he's different style and vocabulary, really doesn't fit in the book. But that's all part of what Elihu is doing there. In his four speeches, he talks about God's silence in chapter 32. He talks about God's justice. Jot those in there on page 41. Chapter 34, he talks about God's freedom and about God's sovereign working. So Elihu comes along and he has things to say about the situation. Like Job's friends, he says, I know that God is righteous, I know that God rewards, and I know that God punishes. But then he goes on to emphasize the aspect of God that they had been missing, and the aspect of God that Job needed to hear. And it has to do with his sovereign working. It has to do with God's freedom. to use whatever and to bring whatever into our lives that He chooses. And that His nature as just and righteous, as the rewarder of those who do good and the punisher of those who do evil, is not compromised by, and it does not prevent Him being free to bring the contrary experience as to what one might expect. You see, God Himself is the one who has built into the universe the principle that you reap what you sow. And that is at the heart of retribution theology. You reap what you sow. But retribution theology, in the air of the three friends, is you always reap what and only what you sow, and never anything else. There is never an overturning of that. Well, the thing is that God is free to overturn whatever He designs into His creation. Has God ever overturned the law of gravity on the earth? Yeah. Waters part and stand up, and the whole nation walks through water in a dry seabed. God is free to alter what He has built into the universe. And that is going to be Elihu's point, and what Job needed to learn. Elihu's strategy was to gain attention. Well, I don't know where that thing was going. To identify with the truth. He corrects errors of understanding. He defines and clarifies certain issues. He demonstrates His care, His capability. And what he's really saying is, this is the important contribution of Elihu, is that God is free. God is free in how He deals with His creatures. He's not inattentive. He knows everything that's going on. He knows every detail about everything. He knows how every single person is going to be affected by every single storm, whether for good or for bad, for blessing or for destruction. He knows. He's not unconcerned. He's concerned about everything that goes on in the universe. And He's never wrong in anything He does. So He's free. And therefore, Job is to wait for his self-disclosure. Quit fuming about the fact that you don't know what God is doing, that you don't understand it, that somehow He obligates Himself, or He is obligated, to give you an explanation of why all of this has come into your life. God is free. He is not obligated to tell you everything that's going on. He's not obligated to tell us anything that's going on. The fact that He does is by His grace and His goodness and His mercy. Now, He has told us a tremendous amount of stuff. He has told us enough about Himself that we can maintain faith even though we don't know what's going on. And that's what Elihu is there to point Job toward. Wait for his self-disclosure. And what I have summarized this is that frustrated impatience is the earwax of the soul. When we are frustrated and impatient with our circumstances and what God is doing, we can't hear God speak to us. And that's what Job was doing. He was talking. And so what Job does in speech 4 is he basically says, look, behold, God is mighty in discriminating understanding. He is exalted in His power to instruct. I think I've changed that to mighty in delivering the oppressed. He is magnificent in the deployment of His clouds. And in chapter 36:26 through 37:18, there is more mention of clouds and meteorological phenomenon associated with clouds in this one passage than all the rest of the Bible put together, I believe somebody has found. And what he is saying there is that the clouds really give us the key to understanding how to respond to God in these situations of suffering and perplexity. Because just as the storm rolls in, and you know, we still don't understand much about the clouds. In fact, scientists are still debating about how clouds form and work. There isn't an agreement on it. They don't really understand. Meteorologists predict weather, but about the best they can do is, you know, with their radars, look at the clouds that are out there in the west and see how fast they're moving to the east and try to predict what they're going to do next. Can anybody tell you in 3 months when the next storm is going to occur and arise and move? Nope. And the clouds are like that. They are God's great demonstration of His freedom, His mysterious freedom to bring into our lives good and ill, sometimes from the exact same instrument. And so Job is to listen to that. So the clouds are amazing in composition, they're mysterious in deployment, they're complex in their manifestation, they're awesome in their effect, they're diverse in their accomplishment. And so Job's folly is exposed and God's majesty is summarized. And the key to the fearing the Lord in 37 is placing humble faith in God, in the God who exercises sovereign grace even when in the crucible of inexplicable affliction. You might want to put that down there under key to the fear of the Lord on page 42. Is placing humble faith in God who exercises sovereign grace even when in the crucible of inexplicable affliction.